So what I want to do today, with your permission, since we are actually discouraged until at least midday to studying Torah, except for the parts of the Torah that speak about the destruction of the temple and speak about that part of history that we are reflecting on today on Tisha B'Av. The reason, by the way, it is forbidden to study the other parts of the Torah until midday is because we recognize that Torah brings joy. We don't want to be overly joyous on this day. It is based on this verse from King David that says, Pikudei Hashem yesharim mesamechei lev, and Torat Hashem temima mishirat nafesh. It's from Psalm 19, which means that the Torah soothes the soul, and the commandments of God bring joy to the heart. That's the literal translation. So on this day of Tisha B'Av, a very somber day, the most somber day in the Jewish calendar, in which we reflect on all the terrible tragedies that happened in our nation, which include, as mentioned, the destruction of both temples. Interestingly enough, even though there was an interval of some 500 and something years, they both were destroyed on the 9th of Av and the 10th of Av, the day that followed. But other tragedies, like the Spanish Inquisition, began on the 9th of Av. The First World War was launched on the 9th of Av, and we all know that also led to the Second World War and to the Holocaust. Many, many tragedies of our nation happened on this day. So it is a day really of reflection and a day of sadness. But on the other hand, it's not necessarily a day in which we have to sink into that sadness or sink into depression. That's against the Torah. We can't sink into a sadness that paralyzes. We have to sink into a sadness, as the Tanya says, that awakens. And the Tanya actually makes the very clear analysis of two words. One is atzvut, which may be translated as sadness or despondency, and one is merirut, which means bitterness. And the Tanya says that one can be bitter, but one dare not be despondent or sad. Why? As the Tanya explains, because bitterness wakens us and leads us to action, leads us to growth, while, God forbid, sadness or despondency sink us into depression and almost paralyze us. So on this day, let us remember the words of the Tanya and then study another part of the Torah, again with your permission. But let us also remember that as we reflect on these terrible tragedies, as we fast together, as we'll pray soon and even evoke these tragedies, let's not sink into depression. Let's not be what he called atzvut, but let's have bitterness. Let's have this type of bitterness that awakens us to do more, maybe even to love more. Because as the sages say very clearly, that the destruction of the temple was brought about because of baseless hatred. And therefore the construction of the third temple, which will come hopefully very soon. According to the Midrash, the third temple will fall from the heaven on Temple Mount, and Mashiach will then come. But that will be brought about by our acts of unconditional love, baseless love. So that bitterness should awaken us not just to do more mitzvahs, but also to love more. And really that, I think, is the goal of the day. The goal of the day is, yes, to reflect, yes, to connect, yes, to understand what happened, yes, to even have tears because of what happened. But on the other hand, yes, to allowing all of that to awaken us to grow more, to do more, to love more. And in that way, I think we can also rectify the destruction of the past through our own construction of goodness in this world. Anyhow, so to focus more on the parts of the Torah that deal with the theme of the day, I wanted to share my screen and really go to the very story, which according to the Talmud launched it all, the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to share this PDF here on my chat box here so that you can all have it, but I'm also going to share my screen. So here you go. You should have it in your chat. That's the PDF with the story. And at the same time, I'm going to share my screen here. Make sure I know how to do this. There you go. Second. Okay,
Got it.
here we go. Yeah?
Yeah.
But you also have it on your chat.
Yeah, we have it.
Okay, fantastic. Wonderful. All right. So I want to go to this story. Some of you may be familiar with it, but it's the classic story of Tisha B'Av, which speaks about two people, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, which happened to be enemies. They hated one another, as you'll soon see. And this story, according to the Talmudic sages, is really the root of what brought about the destruction of the Second Temple. We're speaking about the year of 65, 66 CE. And it is brought in the Talmud, not just for us to understand where the destruction came from, but most importantly, for us to learn some very, very practical and powerful lessons from this story. So let's start right here. Does anyone want to read? Right here, Rabbi Yochanan said, actually, let's start right here. As a result of this incident, Kamsa Bar Kamsa, Jerusalem was destroyed. So as a result of this story, again, it says it very explicitly. Jerusalem was destroyed as a result of this story between Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Let's start right here, actually right here. As a result of the incident involving Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Jerusalem was destroyed. A certain man, does anyone want to read? Go for it. You don't have to read the Aramaic, don't worry. Just the English.
I'll read it.
Please.
Okay. As a result of the incident involving Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Jerusalem was destroyed. A certain man who had a friend named Kamsa and an enemy named Bar Kamsa made a banquet. Go and bring Kamsa to join me at the banquet.
And I'm gonna scroll down. So okay, so he told his attendant, go bring me my best friend, right? Kamsa. Let's just remember that his enemy was Bar Kamsa, which is a very similar name. Anyway, this is what the attendant made a very big mistake. Let's go, continue. Attendant.
Okay, the attendant went and mistakenly brought him Bar Kamsa. When the host arrived at the banquet and found Bar Kamsa sitting there, he said to Bar Kamsa, look here, that man is the enemy of that man. What do you want here? Get up and get out. Bar Kamsa said to him, since I have come, let me stay, and I will give you the value of whatever I eat and drink.
Right, we're going to continue on the next page, but okay, so the story is clear. So this host, we don't know what his name is, by the way, the host, but he has a party and he wants to invite his good friend Kamsa. Unfortunately, when he sends the attendant to invite Kamsa, the attendant maybe had problems in hearing, who knows what, but he went and invited Bar Kamsa instead of Kamsa. Problem was Bar Kamsa was this host's arch enemy. Now Bar Kamsa comes to the party thinking, oh, maybe my enemy now is my friend, maybe he wants to make up. Who knows? He comes to the party. And at the party, the host sees his enemy, Bar Kamsa. He says, what are you doing here? No one invited you. He says, well, the attendant invited me. He says, I don't want you to get out of here. Now he's all humiliated, right? So Bar Kamsa says to the host, well, let me stay. I'll give you for whatever the value of whatever I eat and drink. If I eat a piece of sushi, I'll pay you the $3. If I drink a cup of Coke, I'll pay you the $2. The host continues on. The conversation continues on. Let's go.
The host said to Bar Kamsa, no, I will not let you stay. Bar Kamsa said to him, I will give you the value of half your banquet.
Right. Again, now he upped his offer. Half his banquet, quite a bit. Go ahead.
Okay. Again, the host said to him, no. Bar Kamsa said to the host, I will give you the value of your entire banquet. The host said to Bar Kamsa, no. He grabbed hold of Bar Kamsa with his hand, stood him up, and ejected him from the banquet.
Right. Stop there for a second. So that already, you can imagine the immense animosity between this host and Bar Kamsa. I don't know if it's necessary between Bar Kamsa and the host. Eventually, he overcame his own feelings to come to the party, and maybe to try and make peace, because maybe that's how I interpreted the invitation. But the host can't let go of this hatred. Just imagine, you have your enemy coming to your son's bar mitzvah, to your wedding, right? And then your enemies, you don't want him there, which in and of itself is wrong. But then the enemy says, I'll pay you for your entire wedding. I'll give you. Wouldn't you say, all right, fine, you know what, you can stay? But that's the level of his hatred. He says, no, I don't want you. Get out of here. So he humiliated him in public and kicked him out. Now, Bar Kamsa left. So he says to himself, go for it. Let's continue.
Bar Kamsa said to himself, since the rabbis were seated at the banquet and did not rebuke him for the way he treated me, it is evident that what he did was acceptable to them.
Right.
I go and spread slander against the rabbis in the royal palace.
Right. So not only was he upset at the host, he was upset at the rabbis for keeping quiet, which also, let's keep that in our mind. We'll get back to that. It's a lesson in of itself. Go ahead.
He went and told Caesar, the Jews have rebelled against you. Caesar said to him, who says so? Bar Kamsa said to Caesar, send them an animal as a sacrifice. See whether they offer it in their temple.
Right.
Caesar went and sent a fine calf with Bar Kamsa.
Okay,
As
I'm
he was-
sorry. Yeah, right here.
As he was going to Jerusalem, Bar Kamsa caused a blemish in the calf's upper lip, or as some say, he caused a cataract in the eye. Either way, he ensured that the blemish was in a place where it is considered a blemish for us, that is, the offering in the temple, but it is not considered a blemish for them, for offering outside the temple. Although the animal was
So now the sages faced the dilemma. Do we accept this sacrifice from the governor, from the Caesar, or not? Because if we don't, the Caesar is going to be upset and he might take his revenge. But on the other hand, we can't, because it has a blemish for us, and we can't accept blemished animals in the temple. Let me just ask you, let's pause this for a second. What would you do if you were in the place of the sages? Would you accept the sacrifice, or would you not accept the sacrifice, sticking almost obsessively to your rules, saying, no, we can't? What would you do? Okay, just think about it. You don't have to tell me. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyhow, go for it. Although
the animal was unfit to be offered to the temple, the rabbis considered offering it for the sake of peaceful relations with the Roman government.
Right.
Zechariah ben Abkulas said to them, but people will then say that blemished animals may be offered on the altar. The rabbis considered killing Bar Kamsa so that he would be able to go and tell Caesar that the offering had been refused. Let's see, how do you pronounce it? Zechariah?
Right, Zechariah, yeah.
Zechariah.
Yeah.
Zechariah said to them, but people will then say that one who blemishes consecrated animals is put to death.
Right, so they didn't kill him, and they let him go to tell Caesar, look, the Jews didn't accept your sacrifice. Let's continue. Rabbi Yochanan said.
Rabbi Yochanan interrupts his narrative with the following observation. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan said, the tolerance displayed by Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas in refusing to, is that pronounced correctly, Avkulas?
Yeah, Avkulas, that's right, yeah.
Is in refusing to have Bar Kamsa put to death, destroyed our temple, burned down our sanctuary, and exiled us from our land.
Right, okay, and obviously, I mean, afterwards he went and he told Caesar that the Jews did not accept his sacrifice. That enraged him, and Caesar went and sent his soldiers to Jerusalem to destroy us. And that's how the destruction of the Second Temple began. That's the story, okay? Now, there are many, many different elements to the story. As you can see, first it starts with the deafness, maybe, of the attendant of the host, who goes and invites the wrong man to his host party. Maybe that in of itself is a little lesson. I don't think it's the main lesson, but that is that when you serve as an emissary for someone or a messenger for someone, be as clear as it gets. First, understand that what the message that you received, and then convey it in the clearest way possible. Otherwise, that can in and of itself cause many issues. But that's a minor lesson. We can delve into that too. I want to hear really from you, but I think the major lesson here is divided into two. Number one, of course, what jumps from the text is the hatred of the host towards Bar Kamsa, and how hatred is as destructive as it gets, destroys emotions of people, like the emotion of Bar Kamsa, but at the same time also, by destroying the emotions of people, you're destroying so much more, and you bring destruction eventually to yourself. Almost to quote the psychologists who say that hatred hurts the hater the most. And that's not just because it's toxic, but because when executed, it comes back to you. It's almost like, you know, what they would call today karma. What you do is what you get back. That in of itself is a lesson that we can delve into. But also the other part of the lesson is the silence. And dare I say, not just of the sages, but of everyone at the party. Here is a man being humiliated, being kicked out in such a revolting way, and no one is saying anything. I understand you're a guest. Fine. I understand you're inferior because it's not your home. It's not your party. But still, when evil happens, you have to stand up against it. It's almost what Albert Einstein said, that evil happens in the world not because of evil people necessarily, but because of good people who remain silent while it is happening. And that's exactly what was happening here at the party. You stand up against your host. You don't let it be. You can't do this. And even if you, by the way, fail in your attempt to not allow Bar Kamsa to be kicked out, at least you made a good point. And Bar Kamsa wouldn't have been so upset. He would have said, oh, at least I had the rabbis on my side. At least I had someone on my side, and that would have maybe prevented him from going to the Caesar and doing what he did. That's another lesson. Again, divided into two, the hatred and the people who didn't stand up against it. Lesson number 3, and then again, I'd love to hear your thoughts. We can develop these, is how grudges can also kill, not just you, but others. Bar Kamsa, even though, yes, I feel for him. He was humiliated so badly. He was kicked out of the party. And by the way, he made a huge effort, I'm sure it doesn't say so, but I'm sure, to come to this party of his enemy. I mean, after all, who goes to meet the enemy? When we see an enemy in the street, we look the other way. We don't want to even see that person. But here a man says, you know what? Oh, he invited me. Maybe he's making an effort. I'll come. I'll overcome myself, my emotions. And he does. He overcomes his emotions. And he's there at the party. And then he's humiliated. So I understand everything. But it still doesn't legitimize your reaction to go then to Caesar so that he can launch his revenge, not just on your host, but also on the entire nation. How dare he? Look how destructive grudges are. And that's why, again, we've spoken about this many times in the past. But there is that prayer of Master of the Universe. I forgive everyone that has hurt me, that we say each and every evening before we go to sleep during the bedtime Shema. Because in Judaism, it's so important to just let go. And if you feel this grudge, then stop everything that you're doing. Don't allow it to lead you to destruction, and try and let go of it. Say that prayer, do something else. Don't think about it for a few days, then come back to it maybe with a more sound mind. But that's the third lesson, certainly, that jumps from this story, from these lines, from this text. But I would love to hear, I'm going to stop share, and I would love to hear your take on this, because that's the purpose of Tisha B'Av, to really delve into that which happened in history and together learn lessons from it, to reflect on it, learn lessons from it again, so that we don't sink into depression, but so that we awaken ourselves to growth and to more lessons that we can apply to the future. So
what was the purpose of blemishing the sacrifice?
So good question. So the law in the temple was that any type of blemished animal could not be brought to be sacrificed.
Right.
Now, he didn't want the sages to accept the sacrifice because he was trying to make a point to Caesar, look, the Jews don't want you. The Jews won't accept your sacrifice. So he blemished the animal to make his point. Of course, Caesar didn't know that they didn't accept the animal because it was blemished. He heard what Bar Kamsa was telling him. And Bar Kamsa was hiding that, of course, because he wanted Caesar to take his revenge. So he then went and told Caesar, look, they didn't accept your animal, maybe because they're revolting against you. So that was the trick. the plot of Bar Kamsa against the Jews and even against Caesar. Yeah. There was also, the sages jumped to another lesson that we did not mention, but the lesson of the tolerance, as it's translated here, or the naivete, I would say, of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulus, who said, you know what, let's not accept this blemish. Sometimes there is room for flexibility. Sometimes there is room to say, you know what, for the greater picture, for the peace between the Romans and the Jews, for our own life, right? For our own lives, for the sanctity of our lives, let's allow this sacrifice to be accepted, even though it's blemished. But Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulus was a man who was probably just too much in the box, was too rigid. And there's no room for rigidity in Judaism, really, altogether, but especially in times like those. There's a great story about Rabbi Akiva, who also takes center stage as we study about these days, because he lived throughout the times of the destruction of the temple, that he was once on a cruise ship. And the cruise ship, unfortunately, drowned. And he was left at sea. And thankfully, there was a wooden plank that he was able to float on as he was waiting for help. But the sea was, and that's part of the reason the cruise ship drowned, the sea was very buoyant. It was a stormy day. Yet Rabbi Akiva was able to survive. Eventually, he did get help, and he was moved to safety. And they asked Rabbi Akiva, how did you survive under such conditions, not just on a plank of wood, but when it was so stormy? Rabbi Akiva said that that's because every time there was a wave, I bent down a little bit so that it wouldn't carry me away, so it would go over me. And from that, I learned a lesson in life. Then in life, every time there's a wave, you have to not bend down a little. Don't try and fight the wave. Don't try and be so in the box like Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulus. Sometimes you have to be a little flexible. You have to go under the wave. And that's how you survive the storm of life. But in a way, I think that's yet another lesson on top of the lessons we mentioned, that Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulus was so rigid, was so narrow-minded, so one-sided, that he brought about this destruction too. I think very often that's the source of all of our fights, our tensions in life. When we are not able to see the bigger picture, we see it just the way we want to see it. We can't see it in other person's terms, or we can't see it from another perspective, from a bird's eye view, as they say. We're just so stuck in our own way that it doesn't work. And the relationship, therefore, is just full of tension, also doesn't work. And
sometimes it's hard to see that right away. In hindsight, it's easier, but it's hard to see it when it's happening.
Right. It's true. And I could understand Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulus also. The law is the law. But on the other hand, you have to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
I've said this many times, where Rabbi Steinsaltz would often tell me that it's the question behind the question that counts. You get people asking questions, but there's a person behind that question. And that's what really makes the good leaders good leaders. That's what makes good educators good educators. That's what makes good people good people. I shared yesterday, but as a contrast to this, stories about Rabbi David Schrank, who's one of the really, not so well known, but he's one of the top educators in my eyes. I think in the world of education altogether. There's a book that came out about Rabbi David Schrank, and stories about how he would educate students in his yeshiva for boys and students who came from very troubling backgrounds, and he would just love them. And the book is called Just Love Them. But one of the stories, which I did not share yesterday, is a story about how he understood that in the dorm there was someone stealing from his friends, stealing money. And then he find out who that person was. What was he going to do? You expel that person. If you're a Rabbi Zcharia ben Avkulus, and you only look at things in a one-sided way, in a narrow-minded way, you go to this person, you say you're expelled, and you even humiliate this person. He was the robber. Be ashamed of yourself. But not Rabbi David Trank, who's the opposite of this. What did he do? He went to the bank, to the ATM, took out some of his own money and gathered all the students. And he said to the students, here, I'm putting this cash on my table because the robber came to me. And he's very, 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 he feels very bad. He has a lot of remorse and he wants to return the money. He just doesn't know how much money he took from every person. So he gave me this cash. Anyone who feels that they've been stolen and they know exactly how much, please come and take your money back. The day after, he called the robber secretly into his office. And he said to him, look, I know you're the one who robbed the money. I didn't want to humiliate you. That's against the Torah too. So I did what I did yesterday. Just promise me you'll never do it again. And the robber was so touched that he indeed never robbed again. But that's looking at the bigger picture, looking at the person. The robber himself too deserves some dignity. And the other story I did share yesterday was when he had a rule not to smoke cigarettes in the dorm. And one day he was walking in the dorm and he walks into a room and he sees someone smoking, a student of his. The student became red. And he understood that, he had a choice. Be like Rabbi Zcharia ben Avkulus and say, oh, the rule is the rule. You broke the rule. Get out of here. Or be more, again, question behind the question. And what Rabbi David Trank did so brilliantly, he said, look, I can see you smoking in the dorm. You know it's against the rules. But I got to tell you, I'm also wrong. Because I came into your room without permission. I didn't knock on the door beforehand. So I'll forgive you for what you did. You forgive me for what you did, and we'll call it a day. And that's what happened. The man never smoked again. But that's seeing the person, seeing the situation, looking at all of the elements together. And in a way, that's the contrast of Rabbi Zcharia ben Avkulus. That's how we redeem the nation, and God forbid, not extend the exile of our nation. So it's something in relationships to be reminded of, especially on a day like this, like Tisha B'Av.